Tuesday, everybody, and welcome to Fantasy Wizards on Public House Media. I'm Scott Wisniewski. Robert Gardner is unable to join us today, and I should be having a guest co-host here shortly. He's attempting to log on, but hey, it's the eve of the playoffs, the first game, obviously, on Thursday of the playoff season. We're going to talk about some of how this week went and some of the other things that can help you win some playoff games. I did want to share with you a couple of stories as I've mentioned before, and you've probably heard I'm involved in 7 different leagues, and I made the playoffs in 5 of them. I got buys, first round buys in 4 of them, but I'm a little bit scared, and it's interesting. So one of the leagues I missed the playoffs, I actually finished with a 5-8 record and was the highest scoring team in the league. The flip side of that is I finished 12-1, and I'm the 6th highest scoring team in a 12-team league. So, it's interesting, the interesting hand of fate that can be dealt to you when you play fantasy football. So anyway, I want to get into a few things here while we wait for our guest to get logged in here and make sure he's not having any issues that I can help him through. So in the meantime, we had talked about some strategies a few weeks ago and how it related to Greg Olsen, which, by the way, I'll talk about that in a minute, hasn't worked out great. Josh Gordon being another one, Danny Woodhead, about picking guys up a little bit earlier than most people would and holding a roster spot for them because it could come back and help. I was able to do that with Ezekiel Elliott. Now, I'm rolling the dice in both leagues that I have Elliott. I have a bye this week. I have to win a game next week, and then I get him back for what would be the championship. So again, those are some interesting rolls of the dice. Well, here's another interesting roll of the dice. Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is not going to play this week. Could play next week. If he plays next week, it would be against Carolina, and then the week after against Minnesota. 2 decent defenses, especially that Minnesota defense. Are you willing to take and use up a roster spot for an Aaron Rodgers? It's something that could be considered. We call it the Aaron Rodgers stash away if he's available. Now, some people have, if you have an IR spot in the league, some people have held on to Aaron Rodgers for that and that alone. But we'll see. Some other news and notes that have come out of the week. Rob Gronkowski, suspended for some dirty play, so to speak. He will miss this week's game, which, again, if you're in a fantasy playoff, if you have a bye, great. If you don't, you're going to have to look for tight ends, and we'll talk about that later in the show. Same with Greg Olsen. Greg Olsen's a guy who came back, re-injured himself, but not as severely. Now he's listed as questionable after missing last week's game. Interestingly enough, on a side note that has nothing to do with fantasy football, but with football in general, what a great week of games coming up for the NFC and the NFC playoff picture. Atlanta, New Orleans, a Thursday night game, Carolina against Minnesota, and the Rams against the Eagles. So right now, 6 of the 7 teams that are vying for the top playoff spots are playing each other head to head. So that should be really, really interesting. So I'm hoping that we're able to see some great games to go along with some of the great football that's going to be out there. I am hoping you bear with me. I'm getting text from my would-be co-host that's having some issues. I might have to resend the link here as we continue to do this. This will be my first time resending a link in mid-broadcast. So let's see if oh wait, I think he's in. Larry Hanson joins me. I'm gonna bring Larry into the broadcast here. Larry Hanson joining us on Fantasy Wizards. Larry, you're live, man. You made it. How you doing?
Great. How are you, Scott?
I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yes, I can.
I can. Okay, great. Technology's so fun, isn't it?
It absolutely is, but it's great to have you join us, and it's your first go around. You were last minute replacement. I appreciate you doing this for us. We just started out going through talking about the Aaron Rodgers potentially if you want to stash him away with the roll the dice. Hopefully you don't have to count on him. Gronkowski being suspended and Greg Olsen. And I wanted to talk about some of the stars from this week. Some were expected, some weren't. And I kind of picked three of them. And Larry, you might have some other ones. But the three I was thinking about, Rex Burkhead with his 2 touchdowns and the always unpredictable Bill Belichick offense. And then Tyreek Hill, who I was ready to give up on, had a huge game, and Alvin Kamara has just been amazing the last 8 weeks. Anybody you'd want to throw onto that list or comment on those three?
No, I think those are great. I mean, I drafted Rex Burkhead in 2 of my 3 leagues, and I was impatient with him because he's a New England running back, and he wasn't getting the touches early in the year, and I needed the roster slot. But the problem is with the Belichick running back, he could get 3 touches next week. So I wouldn't count on that as an indication of what it's going to be. Tyreek Hill, he's had the big playability all along, and there's still talent there in Kansas City, and you just hope they can right the ship there because there's teams counting on Kareem Hunt, Alex Smith, and Tyreek Hill, and Greg Kelsey in these next 2 weeks especially. People that drafted them are probably playing these next 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Hey, you know how, this is new kind of for you. We do the Tuesday and the Thursday show, but we take lineup questions and waiver questions, and I have 4 of them. People who have reached out to me over the last 36 hours, wondering what they're going to do. They're in the playoffs. They don't have a bye. They're curious on what they should do. And Jim asks about tight ends. Does he start Cameron Brate versus Detroit or Jimmy Graham versus Jacksonville? Now, I'm going to answer this question because I am in 7 leagues. Obviously, it's conceivable that I have every player in the NFL on at least one team, right? Cameron Brate, though, I made the mistake last week of benching him against the Packers because he'd really not done much the last 4 to 5 weeks, and that kind of bit me in the hindquarters a little bit. Jimmy Graham with a tough matchup against Jacksonville. Larry, if you were picking for Jim, Brate or Graham, who do you start this week?
I go Cameron Brate for 2 reasons. First of all, it looks like Jameis Winston coming back from the injury to his shoulder looked for Brate as kind of an outlet valve. And the second thing is ESPN has Detroit's defense ranked 25th in the league against tight ends. That's a good matchup for Cameron Brate, whereas Jacksonville's in the top 12 in defense against tight ends. So, I mean, I would go Brate. I mean, this is the playoffs. I think you're probably in the 6 to 9 point range for good games for those guys. And with tight ends, touchdowns are a crapshoot. So I'd go Brate.
All right. And, I tend to agree with you there. I mean, Graham's been really productive the last 6 weeks after a quiet start to the season. But with Winston looking more for, quick dump outs, he looks a little bit still banged up that he doesn't want to run very much. That might be, especially in the red zone, that might be his target. Chris is looking for a running back, and he's got Carlos Hyde, Jamal Williams, or Duke Johnson. Let me preface this by saying I will be in Cleveland for the Green Bay Packers Cleveland Browns game as Cleveland will get their first win. And I only say that because I was also victimized back in 1995 watching the Colts get their 1 win against a Super Bowl Green Bay Packer team, which this one is not. Nonetheless, though, when you look at these 3, look, Jamal Williams had a really good game last week. Duke Johnson's a quiet player who, gets some things done, but has a good matchup against the bad Packer defense. And Carlos Hyde, who honestly, his biggest distinction is on most draft days, he's the last starting running back to get drafted.
I looked back at Carlos Hyde's numbers. The last 2 games, he's had 33 carries for 101 yards. So even though he's being productive, he has no touchdowns since week 6. He's got 1 game with 20 carries, and Houston's 4th against the run. Carlos Hyde is out. Now, last week when Aaron Jones was coming back late in the week, I thought he would kind of take some of Jamal Williams's carries and touches, and it turns out Aaron Jones got 1 touch and 8 points off that. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, I think the Duke Johnson and Jamal Williams, that's a toss-up. But I think I think McCarthy realizes he's got to run the ball to win games, and they've got to win this game to have the number 12 fantasies come true next week. So I'm going Jamal Williams with a slight edge there, even though, I mean, we saw what Payton Barber did against the Packers last week, and I think Duke Johnson's a little more talented than Payton Barber. I'm a slight edge to Jamal Williams.
All right, fair enough. Peter, and I agree with you. Jamal Williams is my pick. I am a Carlos Hyde owner and a very disappointed one. Peter is looking for a quarterback. Jared Goff versus Philly. McNown versus Denver. Now, the Denver vaunted defense, especially at secondary, hasn't been as vaunted this year as it's been in the past. That plus McNown's been really, really good. Jared Goff has been good too, but Philly's looking for a little bit of revenge as they got their second and back-to-back road games against NFC West teams. Which one of those two players is the better play?
I didn't think I'd be saying this, but I think McNown. I mean, look at Jared Goff when he played Minnesota. He had 9.8 points, which is just not getting it done. And Jared Goff's had a tendency to have some disappointing games. I mean, he's obviously better than he was last year. I mean,
Sure.
I'm better than he was last year. But he's put up a 7.7 point game, a 9.9 point game, and a 10.9 point game. So he hasn't been consistent this year. And McNown, I mean, he's not flashy, but I think he'll be solid for you.
Amazingly, he is not only the best quarterback in the city or metro area of New York City, he's the best quarterback in the state of New York right now. And definitely keeping the Jets interesting. I also like McNown. And our last lineup quandary, and of course, we'll take your live feedback as well. If you have questions or comments, you can hit us up in the comment section. But Sarah is in a PPR league. She's looking for a wide receiver, either Michael Crabtree against a really bad Kansas City secondary or Funchess against a really good Vikings secondary. I understand the trepidation with Crabtree because he was really hot in the first 6 weeks and has cooled off, but I still like that matchup better than what Funchess is dealing with.
I mean that's strictly a matchup play, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, Cam Newton is not a steady Eddie guy that you're going to get a certain performance out of him. He's been up and down this year, even though the Panthers are in playoff contention. Yeah, it's got to be Crabtree, and you got to cross your fingers and hope.
And I think Sarah, she also sent a little note aside saying the only reason she was considering it was because of the volume of targets Funchess will get. Again, we still can't believe they traded Kelvin Benjamin and the uncertainty of Greg Olsen for that game. But yeah, Kansas City's terrible. I mean, they're as sure of a play you play against the Kansas City secondary as you would when you play the Green Bay Packers defense. You have to get your guys in there, right?
Well, maybe not the Browns, but but yeah, against the Packers, against the Chiefs, yeah, you got to get your guys in there. So
All
I
right,
agree.
let's move on to our Miracle or Mirage segment. And last week we were advocating perhaps benching Alex Smith. He had been quiet for a few weeks, and then he just went crazy last week against the Jets. Do you see Alex Smith returning to Alex Smith weeks 1 through 8 form? Was this an anomaly? Do you still start him, or is it somebody? Do you expect him to be the Alex Smith he's been the last 3 or 4 weeks?
He had 37 points, but he had a 70-yard touchdown pass and a 70-yard run in that game. Those
Yeah.
are fluke plays that, those bolster your numbers, and they're great if they happen when he's in your lineup. But again, those aren't things you can count on week to week. And just the whole Kansas City offense, it's a downward trend, and I don't like it. I really don't. So I say Mirage there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if you're stuck with him as your starting quarterback for your playoff game, you're going to have some other things go your way. Hey, how about Mike Davis for Seattle? Now, we've been trying to figure out the Seattle backfield since this show started in early September. Was it going to be Lacey? Was it going to be Rawls? Was it going to be Procise? What about McKissick? And now Mike Davis looks like he's the next man up. He looked okay against Philadelphia. Is this a guy that you're looking to pick up off the waiver wire if he's out there? Can he help you this week?
God, I look at that 16 for 64. That's Sam Congato numbers, you know. That doesn't do anything for me. I mean, granted, if you're looking for a running back at this point in the season, you need a lottery ticket. I would play him. But if you have a good solid running back core, I'd stay away because those are pedestrian numbers. 16 for 64.
Yeah, I agree. And I
Scott, I
think,
got to tell you something.
uh
I got to tell you something hilarious. You remember the year we were playing fantasy baseball and 6 Brewers starting pitchers got drafted?
oh God, yes, yes, yes. When none of them, when maybe one of them should
In
have
one
been
of my
drafted.
leagues, and it's not a deep league, we had 4 Seahawk running backs get drafted this year.
Oh, Jesus.
So that instantly made me think of that Brewers year.
Well, if you have four, you don't have one, is what I guess what they say. I agree. Look, I've been burnt by Seattle running backs trying to figure them out all year. I say Mirage as well. Speaking of interesting plays, Payton Barber last week, everybody was talking, hey, Jacquizz Rodgers, he's going to get the carries with Martin out. It ended up being Barber. Don't know what Martin's status is. Even if Martin plays, though, let's be honest, he hasn't been spectacular. Are you taking a flyer on Payton Barber?
I would. And I think he's a miracle. Detroit's the run in fantasy. Peyton Barber could handle the long workload. I mean, down in, down out. I mean, we saw that especially in the second half against the Packers. Um, yeah, I think that's a good lottery ticket type play this week.
Excellent. And I would agree. And the other one that I found on a couple waiver wires, and that's why I put him out here. He's also on some teams and rosters. Matt Forte. In the beginning of the season, it was all about Powell, and Matt Forte was just an afterthought. But the last couple weeks, Matt Forte has looked a little bit more spry, a little younger than his legs really are. If Matt Forte is available, do you pick him up? And if he's on your team, are you thinking of maybe a flex play for him against Denver?
I would consider him as a flex play. I think he's probably the lower end of the second running backs or the third running backs. But yeah, I mean he's starting to get touches in the passing game and the running game. So I mean he's definitely somebody to consider. I mean, again, though, I mean, we're not talking about teams that got lucky and got like Ingram in the third or fourth round and had a solid first or second round running back that, I mean, most teams don't have that. So, yeah, he's definitely somebody to consider there.
He's Larry Hanson. I'm Scott Wisniewski. It's Fantasy Wizards, a Tuesday edition here on Public House Media. Running through the rest of our Miracle or Mirage list, Ryan Grant, not the Ryan Grant that Green Bay Packer fans may or may not remember, but Ryan Grant from the Washington Redskins has had a couple of touchdowns in the last few weeks.
Yeah, but he's going up against the Chargers. The Chargers are a strong defense against the pass, believe it or not. And, I mean, touchdowns are fluky. I'm not seeing it down in and down out with Ryan Grant as a focal point of their offense. I mean, he had 5 catches last week, but before that, he hadn't had 5 catches in a game since week 8. So, I mean,
Sure.
his yardage numbers 39, 19, 38, 39, 25, 59. This is a guy that provides no value unless he scores a touchdown.
I've warned people for years that have known me. When you're looking for a receiver on the waiver wire, you might not see it right away on the main stat page. You might have to search for it. Look for targets. Ryan Grant doesn't get enough targets for me to even consider adding him to my roster. So I agree with you there as well, Larry. How about Dede Westbrook, the rookie for Jacksonville? Hearns is hurt. He's probably not going to play again this week. Allen Robinson's missed the whole season, basically. Marcus Lee's been okay, but Dede Westbrook's healthy now. Maybe he's starting to build a rapport with Blake Bortles. Are you even thinking of adding him or looking to play him?
It would be hard for me to pick somebody that Blake Bortles is throwing the football to, but he does have 25 targets in his last 3 games. But the flip side of that is he's going against Seattle. I think the 2 out of 3 game going against Seattle and Blake Bortles as a quarterback says he's a pass for me.
Yeah, I would agree as well. I mean, I know Bortles has had a couple of nice games this year, but as far as consistency goes, yeah, I too am not a Blake Bortles supporter. How about Mike Wallace? Mike Wallace, listen, I've said this before, and this might be new for you. Joe Flacco is the worst quarterback in football, and I base that on the full package of what he makes for salary, times the years in the league, plus how bad his pedestrian numbers are. That said, Mike Wallace has had a couple of really nice games.
So you're saying Joe Flacco is not elite? Let's
That's
settle that debate, huh?
that's right. Yes.
I mean, we saw it 2 weeks ago. The Steelers can be thrown on. I mean, we saw it last night a little bit. It can be thrown on. When Brett Hundley's lighting you, I think, and Flacco has a tendency to hit 1 or 2 deep balls in a game. He still throws a good deep ball. He just can't manage a game down in and down out. I like Wallace against that Steelers defense. And
I do.
Shazier's out this week too.
Yep, I do as well. I think Mike Wallace is a good play here. And the last one, and then we'll move on to our next segment. Tight end Steve Anderson. Um, I'm Polish and I should be able to pronounce his name, but I can't. CJ got hurt, knocked out of the game for Houston. Steve Anderson had 2 touchdowns. But could this be like some fool's gold like we saw with Ricky Seals Jones? I don't think you can rely on this week in and week out, can you?
No, not with Tom Savage as his quarterback. I would say if you're resorting to Steve Anderson, go to your waiver wire, see if you can pick up Cameron Brate or Austin Seferian-Jenkins. Denver's defense is 31st in the league against tight ends, so that
There you
might be
go.
a better play for you than Steve Anderson.
I agree. Also, in a lot of leagues, Charles Clay is still available as well. So yeah, don't get fooled by the fact that he's playing against San Francisco because he does still have Savage throwing to him. So let's move on and talk about keep him or kick him. And my caveat again to this is when I say kick him, I don't necessarily mean cut him. Maybe I mean bench him, but there's no real alliteration to keep him or bench him. So keep him or kick him just sounds better. Last week, Jameis Winston, his numbers weren't terrible, but he just didn't look right. And I don't know if you felt the same way. I know he's got Detroit. They're not a great defensive team, but are you concerned that there might be an injury? I mean, there were a couple of times where Winston could have ran and chose not to. Are you starting him this week, or are you looking for other options?
I'm definitely looking for other options. I just think he's a spaz who doesn't know how to take care of the football. So he's going to gack up an interception or a fumble. That's going to cost you points in most leagues. And I mean, he hasn't been consistent again. And a lot of his value is on his running. And we saw him limping around last week. So he's a kick for me.
All right, and I would agree with that as well. Hey, how worried are you about Matt Stafford and his injury? Are you starting him? Do you think he's 100%? I know, again, Tampa Bay, not a great defense. Are you looking somewhere else?
If he plays, I start him. Here's why. They haven't had a 100-yard rusher in 4 years. Volume passing offense. It's going to be a high volume passing offense. He's going to throw 40 times. I say if he's playing, you start him. Unless you
By
have
the
somebody back, unless you have Carson Wentz or Russell Wilson or Tom Brady or Drew Brees as your other quarterback. Otherwise, start him.
Well, and Drew Brees not even a sure thing anymore. By the way, you cut out for just a quick second. How many years has it been since the Lions player rushed for 100 yards?
4 years.
Jesus. Wow. Well, there you have it. Yeah, I agree. If he's healthy, you definitely play him. He's got a good matchup, and he will throw the ball quite a bit. This one breaks my heart a little bit. Kareem Hunt. I am a Kareem Hunt owner. I have been saying keep him, keep him, keep him for a while. Even last week when there was a ton of yards being thrown up, Kareem Hunt wasn't the one really, doing a whole lot from a fantasy standpoint. I might be starting to think to look for other options, but chances are you don't have a lot of other options if you've been riding Kareem Hunt all year. What's your thoughts on Kareem Hunt?
I hate to say it. I picked him before Spencer Ware's injury. I picked him in the 5th round of a draft, and he helped me a lot earlier in the season. But I'm going to say kick. I mean, the problems the Chiefs have had are well documented, but yeah, it breaks my heart to say it, but he's a kick for me.
This next one, I know we both kind of agree. We kind of talked about it earlier. Carlos Hyde, look for other options. I mean, if you don't have any other options, fine, because he should get enough touches to maybe get a touchdown. But I'm not liking the matchup, and I'm not liking having to rely on him.
I totally agree. I like I told you earlier, I just think he's a terrible play at this point. He's not productive when he is getting the ball.
A couple more here, some controversial, some not. This one not real controversial. Buck Allen, obviously with how Collins has played there, um, I don't see any use for Buck Allen. I mean, he'll get a couple catches. He may get a touchdown out of it. I wouldn't bet on that. I think there's other options.
The key stat for Buck Allen is he's only played 38 snaps in 3 games since Woodhead's been back, so that's not a lot.
Okay, so the guy who has confounded a lot of people, again, he was a first round pick in just in every league I've been in this year, and like I mentioned, there's 7 of them. Julio Jones was a first round pick. Julio Jones had his breakout game, back on November 26th. Last week, 1 catch. I can't advocate benching him because of what you invested in him in a draft pick, but man, is he a roll of the dice. Maybe he'll do something against the Saints. Obviously, you have to start him, but I think you got to hold your nose when you do it sometimes.
It's the playoffs, Scott. If you lost a playoff match because you benched Julio Jones and he went for 150 and 3 touchdowns, you wouldn't be able to live with yourself.
Right. He's
You
pinned
gotta
you
play
into
him.
a corner.
As inconsistent as he's been, you've got to play him because in the playoffs you're looking for guys that can do that. You're looking for guys that can put up unbelievable numbers, and he can do it. Will he? We don't know, but he can.
Well,
I think that game against New Orleans is going to be a track meet.
I think you're right. I was advocating back in around week 6, though, trying to use his name and trade for, a couple of decent players, which then you wouldn't have this dilemma, But I agree. You're going to start him. A guy who used to have the ability to go for 150 and 3 touchdowns when number 12 was throwing to him was Jordy Nelson. Since the injury, 16 catches in about 5.5 weeks. You can't be starting Jordy Nelson right now.
Don't start any Packers receivers. Play their running game. Their running game has been Brett Hundley's come in. Play the running game in fantasy. Leave the receivers alone.
All right. And then lastly, and I think this is more of a question based on Winston's injury than anything else because he's still a stellar player. But Mike Evans, maybe kick him, keep him is a bad determination. How about cautious or are you worried about the overall production? I mean, Mike Evans didn't do much last week against the soft Packer defense. He wasn't really even targeted that much.
No, but the target number, that was an outlier against the Packers. More concerning to me is he hasn't scored a touchdown since week 7.
Right.
This might be he might break out for 2 this week against the Lions, because he's got 4 touchdowns all year, and 2 of them were in back-to-back weeks, and since then he hasn't scored. So I would roll the dice. I think he might get in the end zone against Detroit.
Doesn't this just kind of tell you how weird the NFL is? So last year, Tampa Bay was a team on the rise. Remember? Oh, just wait till next year. They're a wild card team for sure. You never sustaining. So for all the people who are mad, like all the Packer fans who are wringing their hands and want Ted Thompson fired, and maybe it is time to look a different direction. But whatever the case is, the sustained success that teams like the Packers and the Steelers and the Patriots, of course, have had in Seattle recently, that's not an everyday occurrence. I mean, I'm interested to see how Minnesota, St. Louis, and Philadelphia, if all 3 of them are playoff teams next year, if they can sustain that success. It's not as easy as it looks, and Tampa Bay is one of those teams that's finding that out.
Yeah, and I mean, I think they did it in. I'm not a Jameis Winston fan. I don't think he's that good. I think he's, like I said earlier, he's a spaz who doesn't take care of the ball, and that's going to cost you games. I mean, sustained success in the NFL is difficult. And looking at the Packers example, I think number 12 bandaged over a lot of problems in that organization. We have seen the rest of that organization exposed in the last month and a half.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But that being said, it'll be very interesting to see. So, real quick, because we didn't get a chance to do this at the beginning of the show because you were still logging. How'd your fantasy season go? Your regular season end up for you?
I did pretty well. My big league I'm in, that I've been in 8 years, I didn't make the playoffs the first 5 years I was in that league. 2 years ago, I made it but lost in the semifinals in the 3rd place game. Last year, I won it. This year, I'm the number 1 seed in the playoffs, so I'm in good shape there. In your league I'm in, I took the 5th out of 5 playoff spots, so I'm playing in a 5-4 game this week.
Nice.
And then in my other league, I started out 5-2, led the league in points scored, and I'm still leading the league in points scored, but I'm 5-8 now, and I've been eliminated. But I'm still points scored, so
that's amazing, because I just talked about this at the beginning. So I have 2 teams. So I made the playoffs in 5 out of 7 leagues. I have 4 buys, right? But the 2 teams I wanted to focus on that were weird is I'm 12-1 in one league, but I'm the 6th highest scoring team. Okay. And I'm 5-8 in another, and I'm the highest scoring team by a wide margin. So you just never know how the karma and the luck is going to play out, because I feel better about that 5-8 team than I do about the 12-1 team that's slowly starting to fade on me.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I consider it a success. I mean, win-loss record in fantasy football is a little bit of luck, but if you can keep putting up points week after week after week, year after year, that'll evoke good things for you. So for those of you who have had hard luck this year, it happens to everybody.
I'm going to leave everybody with this, as somebody who's been a commissioner for over 24 years, and run 2 leagues of my own. 3. I forgot about the league that you and I are in. So, but the one thing I always try to do is make things different, change up some rules and whatnot. In my big league, my biggest league that's been 24 years old now, the final wild card spot goes to the highest scoring remaining team. So in other words, the division winners get in, wild cards get in based on record until we hit the 6th seed, and the 6th seed is the highest scoring remaining team. We've been doing that for 8 years, and 3 times that team has won the Super Bowl. So I think if you're a commissioner out there, it's a good motivation to keep teams like that interested, so they don't lose faith and stop putting in a lineup and all those other things that could happen, is to reward that team for being consistently good all year. So anyway, I don't know what you think about that, but
I like it.
So, well, Larry, I hope you had fun, man. This was great.
Yeah, this was great, Scott. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it, and good luck this week.
Thank you.
Win some ball games.
You as well, and Robert Gardner. I hope you're feeling better. My normal Tuesday co-host. You've been watching Fantasy Wizards on Public House Media. Larry Hanson joining Scott Wisniewski. Good luck to all of you. We'll see you Thursday. Take care, everybody.